President, it would be a very disappointing moment if we were failed to invoke cloture. This bill from the very beginning has been completely bipartisan, open to amendments. In the course, as Senator King in his eloquent remarks pointed out, of the committee hearing, we entertained over 100 amendments on a bipartisan basis. We came to the floor with a bill that passed our committee 23-3, overwhelmingly bipartisan. We also brought to the floor a substitute amendment, including approximately 60 amendments that were also bipartisan. And then we had another series of 20 amendments that were completely bipartisan that would have been voted on. But they were objected to because several members did not get their amendments. Now, just to point out, the majority of these amendments aren't even within the jurisdiction of the Armed Services Committee. They don't relate directly to the men and women of the armed services. They might have foreign policy implications, but they're not something that is essential to the passage of the National Defense Authorization Act. And I can recall many times, and maybe our recollections differ a bit, I can recall many times on this floor where the NDAA was brought up and both sides could not agree on amendments, and we went through the process and we invoked cloture and we voted on the substitute bill and we went off to conference. So this would not be the first occasion in which, ironically, a few people did not get their amendments. In fact, in the previous occasions, there were many, many people who did not get their amendments. And so, again, I go back to the point of we have produced a bipartisan piece of legislation. And I commend the ranking member who we work with closely, the committee chairs and the ranking members. The staff has done a superb job. And we're here just one vote, procedural vote away from moving forward. And I think we should move forward for the benefit of the men and women of the armed services, as Senator King so, again, eloquently described. And I think the other factor, too, is that eventually we have to reconcile whatever we do or don't do with the House of Representatives. And certainly I think it gives us much more credibility, much more clout, much more leverage when we have a strong bill that has passed the floor of the Senate. And we're not talking about 100 amendments that we have to consider. We're talking about a handful of senators who didn't get their way, even though many others were frustrated. I think, again, our duty is to move forward, to pass this cloture vote this evening, and then to move forward to final passage, and then reconcile our differences with the House and come back with legislation. At this point, and I think the chair would agree with me, as it stands right now, I would be very proud of this legislation that we passed, because it's bipartisan, because it responds to the needs of the men and women of the armed forces, because it establishes robust resources for the Department of Defense, much more than were advocated by the President in his budget. So we are taking a strong step forward, and I just would hate to see this as a sidestep away from final passage. So, Madam Chairman, I would urge all my colleagues to
Would the Senator yield for a question?
I'd be happy to yield.
My recollection is, and we've passed this bill, as you both have recognized, every year for the past 60 years, including the last 4 or 5 years. The last several years, there weren't that many amendments. There were a few, and it was always agreed in advance. There was a package, just as we had the other night, but everybody didn't get there. There was an unlimited number of amendments or votes on amendments. There was generally an agreed upon number of amendments, and it wasn't very many. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct in my recollection, Senator. You know, I have seen, as I said before, my memory, I hope, does not fail me, but occasions where we've had, once we got the substitute adopted, in some cases, no amendments. We just went to final passage, ultimately. In other cases, a handful of amendments. And last year, I don't believe we had the kind of amendments, the number of amendments that we're offering this year. And every year, senators, they have amendments. They have, some of them have nothing whatsoever to do with the national defense. Others have some foreign policy implications. But the decision is based upon a fair allocation between both sides. And that was the case last 2 weeks ago or a week ago when we considered this. The amendments we were proposing, the 20 or so amendments, were equally divided or either that or completely bipartisan. And so I think we're here tonight, and in fact, frankly, to your point, I think this would represent more amendments than in many years I witnessed the passage of the NDAA. Madam
The clerk will report the motion to invoke closed